Mo Meaning Mondays number 8. If this is the first time you're clicking on this series, it's a series in which I go over Jordan Peterson's maps of meaning, virtually page by page, week by week. And this week we're on page 8 because this is the 8th week I'm doing it. A recap. I usually do a recap of all the pages. Last week I skipped the recap because I think it was getting a little bit repetitive with those first 2 pages that we had. This week I'm only going to recap the previous page, but I'm going to bring in some of the other pages as we move along further from them. So the recap of page 7, as I see it, is that while our being has not changed, our conception of it has. This has emptied our existence of meaning, something we live in denial about on a conscious level, while unconsciously we act out the old ways of our ancestors. And so I believe on this page he actually used the words, we're living, quote, as if life is meaningful. So it's that famous as if phrase that Jordan has often used when referencing his belief in God, that he acts as if God exists. And here on this page he says that modern man sort of acts as if his life is meaningful in a religious way, but that can't be given what he professes, what he says he believes. So myth developed the mind into the scientific mind, which then killed its parent, myth, and declared it alone the creator of the conceptual world. So this is almost like a retelling in a mythical way. The way our modern scientific understanding of the world came about, it's almost Luciferian in regards to Paradise Lost, Milton's Paradise Lost, and it's almost like a Greek tragedy too. So, but the scientific mind is still a child, this child that killed its parent and claimed that it was uncreated. It has not proven its worth or fortitude when faced with adversity. In fact, you could perhaps say that we've seen how horrible it performs when faced with adversity in the last 130 years or so. It has not lived long enough in this world compared to other ways of conceiving the world and being in the world. So our ancient traditions, our ancient myths and religions that have sort of dominated world cultures for thousands and thousands of years seem to have something right about them, and we shouldn't easily dismiss them. And this carries over onto page 8. So should we be so quick to dismiss the old ways, the ways that prove to work over thousands of years? Should we pursue a meaningless existence into the abyss? And this is sort of what Nietzsche was questioning, and this is why Nietzsche said that man has to become a superman and overcome himself and create new values, has to be the value creator. Are there not values at work in the old ways that we have summarily dismissed that may prove useful, even in our modern age? So and this is the question Brett Weinstein keeps asking, what can we carry over? Because there must be something good, but that still works in the modern age. And Jordan is always throwing up the caution sign saying, don't be so quick to think that you can sift out what's good and what's bad. And there's multiple reasons for this. First of all, we don't live long enough to test what's good and what's bad in our modern age. And Jordan, I think, points to several things that sort of break tradition in our modern age, such as birth control and modern divorce rates or something, but I think primarily birth control as something that's sort of testing the waters of modernism and what we can find permissible. And while we may do something, and while we may pursue something like birth control as a way for women to be equal to men, and so we might have good intentions, we may be opening up a Pandora's box, so to speak, that we are not aware of. And we won't be aware of it for 100 or 200 years, a time frame that's outside any individual. And it's even hard for a society to keep this in mind over 100 years' time and so forth. All right, so now I'm going to read page 8. I think this is the most of page 8. We find ourselves in an absurd and unfortunate situation when our thoughts turn involuntarily to consideration of our situation. It seems impossible to believe that life is intrinsically, religiously meaningful. We continue to act and think as if nothing fundamental has really changed. This does not change the fact that our integrity has vanished. This is a little bit of page 7, I guess, that carries on to page 8. I got this screenshot from Amazon's preview page for the Kindle edition of Maps of Meaning, which is not for sale for some reason. The great forces of empiricism and rationality and the great technique of the experiment have killed myth, and it cannot be resurrected, or so it seems. We still act out the precepts of our forebears nonetheless, although we can no longer justify our actions. Our behavior is shaped, at least in the ideal, by the same mythic rules, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not covet, that guided our ancestors for thousands of years. They lived without benefit of formal empirical thought. This means that those rules are so powerful, so necessary, at least, that they maintain their existence and expand their domain, even in the presence of explicit theories that undermine their validity. That is a mystery. And here's another, and this is where we're going to get into page 8 shortly. How is it that complex and admirable ancient civilizations could have developed and flourished initially if they were predicated upon nonsense? That's interesting. I didn't notice that there was the word admirable before ancient civilizations, before I read this earlier today. If a culture survives and grows, does that not indicate in some profound way that the ideas it is based upon are valid? If myths are mere superstitious proto-theories, why did they work? Why were they remembered? Our great rationalist ideologies, after all, fascist, say, or communist, demonstrated their essential uselessness within the space of mere generations, despite their intellectually compelling nature. Traditional societies predicated on religious notions have survived essentially unchanged in some cases for tens of thousands of years. How can this longevity be understood? Is it actually sensible to argue that persistently successful traditions are based on ideas that are simply wrong, regardless of their utility? Is it not more likely that we just do not know how it could be that traditional notions are right, given their appearance of extreme irrationality? Is it not likely that this indicates modern philosophical ignorance rather than ancestral philosophical error? I really like how he phrased that sentence there. We do have, that might be one of the sentences he rewrote several times. We have made the great mistake of assuming that the world of spirit, quote unquote, described by those who preceded us was the modern, quote, world of matter, end quote, primitively conceptualized. This is not true, at least not in the simple manner we generally believe. The cosmos described by mythology was not the same place known to the practitioners of modern science, but that does not mean it was not real. We have not yet found God above, nor the devil below, but we do not yet understand where, quote, above and, quote, below might be found. We do not know what our ancestors were talking about. This is not surprising because they did not, quote, know either, and it didn't really matter to them that they did not know. Consider this archaic creation myth from Sumer, the birthplace of history. Quote, so far, no cosmogonic text, properly speaking, has been discovered, but some allusions permit us to reconstruct the decisive moments of creation as the Sumerians conceived it. The goddess Namu, whose name is written with the pictograph representing the primordial sea, is presented as, quote, the mother who gave birth to the sky and the earth, end quote, and the, quote, ancestress who brought forth all the gods. The theme of the primordial waters, imagined as a totality at once cosmic and divine, is quite frequent in archaic cosmogonies. In this case, too, the watery mass is identified with the original mother, who, by parthenogenesis, gave birth to the first couple, the sky and the earth, Ki, incarnating the male and female principles. This first couple was united to the point of merging in the Hieros Gamos, the mystical marriage. From their union was born Enlil, the god of the atmosphere. Another fragment informs us that the latter separated his parents. The cosmogonic theme of the separation of sky and earth is also widely disseminated. And now this is the last part of page 8. This myth is typical of archaic descriptions of reality. What does it mean to say that the Sumerians believed that the world emerged from a, quote, primordial sea, which was the mother of all, and the sky and the earth were separated by the act of a deity? We do not know. Our abysmal ignorance in this regard has not been matched, however, by a suitable caution. We appear to have made the presumption that stories such as these, myths, were equivalent in function and intent, but were inferior methodologically to empirical or post-experimental description. It is this fundamentally absurd insistence that, above all, has destabilized the effect of religious tradition upon the organization of modern human moral reasoning and behavior. The, quote, world of the Sumerians was not objective reality, as we presently construe it. It was simultaneously more and less, more in that this, quote, primitive world contained phenomena that we do not consider part of, quote, reality, such as affect and meaning. Less in that the Sumerians could not describe or even conceive of many of those things the processes of science have revealed to us. When I initially went over this page, I thought it was kind of simpler than other pages and contained less information. But upon a second examination, there was quite a bit there that I hadn't seen when I first looked at it. So it's one of those things it's helpful to read a second time or a third time if you like. So I have this slide titled "Old equals wrong, or does it?" So this page opens with the question, is it actually sensible to argue that persistently successful traditions are based on ideas that are simply wrong, regardless of their utility? How can the longevity of a civilization that has lasted some thousands of years be understood if the ideas it is based upon are simply incorrect? Doesn't this survival indicate, in some profound sense, the validity of those foundational ideas? And it reminds me of something Jordan has often said about telling the truth, that there's a whole lot of reality out there and just a little bit of you. And the idea being that if you're trying to mess with that whole lot of reality, the little bit of you is not going to fare so well. The whole lot of reality is going to win that battle. So if you're going to survive, and further if you're going to thrive on an individual basis out to perhaps a societal basis like a whole civilization, you have to be living in a manner congruent with reality, given the statement above. If in some way or other, directly or indirectly, your beliefs align yourself and your society with that reality, quote, out there, you are more likely than not to survive, and to survive in the long run. Irrational appearance. In the previous pages, Jordan argued that modern people have the outward appearance of rationality. We are descriptively atheistic, but moral/religious in our disposition. We say one thing that is congruent with our age of modern belief, but act out the archaic ways of our ancestors on a deeply unconscious psychological level. Here Jordan is now saying that there is an irrational appearance to those old beliefs, those old ways. They are descriptively irrational, if you want to use the same kind of sentence format as above, descriptively irrational as we are as modern day people descriptively atheistic, but in disposition deeply rational in the sense of being congruent with some major part of reality, just as we are in disposition moral or religious. This confuses us in our judgment of those old beliefs. we cannot understand how they can be, quote, right, given how irrational they seem. And I think he emphasizes the seemingness of it. That it's perhaps just, it's our notion, we are laying the irrationality layer onto those belief systems. It's not necessarily there in and of itself. So I also want to note how I think he uses the word right. So does he mean correct, true, real? Are we not talking about the truth of the belief? Are the old ways true? Do they conform to what is, quote, real? And does this in actuality mean just what is true? And if you want to go to my Peterson Paradox number 2 video, that's all about the truth. And I lay out there a few different sources I'm using to gauge what this word true and truth means. I'm using Heidegger, McGilchrist, a little bit of McGilchrist, and Joseph Ratzinger's Introduction to Christianity, and some Karl Barth, to understand and round out this idea of truth and what Jordan might be meaning here as well. But now, as I laid out that material in that video, it's about an hour and 20-something minutes long of laying out those texts, hopefully in a way that you can understand it, because I sort of cherry-picked some paragraphs from Heidegger so that it doesn't explode your brain. I'm going to be talking about what's in that video in my next Peterson Paradox video, which I think is it's really number 5. That's the next one, because I did them out of order. So if this little side note or sidebar interests you about the truth and what Peterson might be getting at by what's true, and how this is fitting into what I call the Peterson Paradox, you might want to check that series of videos out. So I'll just continue on here with page 8 of Maps of Meaning for now. Is it not likely that this indicates modern philosophical ignorance rather than ancestral philosophical error? Again, I like the way he said that. Jordan has turned the tables once again on modern conceptions. So where we think we're philosophically sophisticated, and we think we kind of have this scientific mind and knowledge, and we kind of know what we need to know, so much more so than ancient people. The paradox, again, I guess I wrote it right in the slide if you want to refer to the paradox series of videos I did. The more we think we know, in this case, the greater our ignorance actually becomes. And that can be a good thing. So the more, I think what Socrates says, that the only thing he's sure of is that he knows nothing, right? Alright, here's the first page again in case I needed to refer to it. So our simple modern understanding. We simply apply our way of conceptualizing the world into the minds of our ancestors and subtract our technological or scientific advancements, thereby reducing their beliefs to mere, quote, primitive imaginings of how their environment worked and what their place was in that environment. This is a mistake, according to Jordan, because our conceptions of the world and our modern minds have changed, so much and so drastically over the course of basically the scientific revolution and the medieval era. We make them, like modern people, just really unsophisticated and dumb regarding, quote, superstitious beliefs. But how sophisticated really are modern people, considering popular shows like Ghost Hunters or the Kardashians? We imagined that they were trying to explain in a scientific way, though primitive, quote, how the world works. But the scientific how had not yet been conceptualized in their minds. This could not have been what they were trying to do. This is when people turn the Bible into a science book. Science did not exist, so there's no way the Bible could be a science book, conceptually. Many developments had to occur before we were able to apply the, quote, scientific layer of understanding to our reality, to map it onto our reality. So presuppositional beliefs and institutions had to be developed over time, which in turn reshaped our minds, which improved those beliefs and institutions further. And this cycle of improvement continued over and over again until we came to our sort of hyper-scientific and hyper-modern conceptualization of reality. The rise of the church, of the state, of the university system, technological progress such as the printing press, and religious strife such as the Reformation sort of went hand in hand towards, quote, progressing society. Now, this is something that I'm adding in here. I meant to say that I kind of did this a lot in this Mo Meaning Monday, and the last one, I think. I started to put more of my commentary into it and not just talk about what exactly Jordan Peterson's saying on the page. But so these things are going hand in hand towards progressing society, towards forming a foundation from which the scientific mind could be born. Without those things predating it, you would not have gotten necessarily the scientific mind or conceptions as we know them today. So up is up and down is down. This, quote, place described by ancient belief systems was not the same cosmos that our scientific mind understands as matter and energy. Up meant up directionally, but it also meant something more metaphorical. Down meant down directionally, but also bad or evil, etc. Heaven was up, hell was down. Where? Point to this up, this heaven, or to this down or hell on the map, demands the scientific mind. This is merely a confusion of what the language is trying to present. At bottom, it reveals the ignorance of the modern scientific-oriented mind. We don't know what they were talking about mythologically in their metaphorical languages that themselves are long dead. But they might not have even, quote, known it themselves either. The very basics of understanding, of knowing, metaphor and epistemology, if you want to check out my video on metaphor and epistemology, it sort of dabbles in this, of knowing were very probably different, and this just adds another layer of confusion and mystery to what we don't yet understand. And here, what he said about how the ancients' world was sort of more in some ways and less in other ways, it sort of reminded me of approaching the world as children approach it. And you'll see this referenced in the Bible, and even in the beginning parts of Maps of Meaning, he says that a child perceives the world very differently than an adult mind that's been conditioned to perceive it otherwise. And a child perceives the world much more similarly in the way that our ancestors did, in that it's full of meaning. The meaning is not subtracted or abstracted away from the sense data. So if you think, it made me think of the movie Hook with Robin Williams, and the whole idea of this adult, played by Robin Williams, Pan, the adult Peter Pan, traveling back to Never Never Land, and how Never Never Land is a world that is less and more. It's more meaningful, magical, and mysterious, as that grown Pan figure finds out. But it's less about objective knowledge. It's less scientific process. It's less knowing about the grand cosmic scale of things, like the universe and stars and suns and the scientific bits about gravity and that kind of thing. And it's less about the tiny quantum level of things, that the science about electrons and quarks and stuff. And it's more about the scale of human-to-human interaction. And this is, I think, what's the real religious scale. It ultimately comes down to human-to-human interaction. And part of the genius of Christianity is it brings God to us in a human form, which is something that we can relate to and understand. And I think that's the last, that's the last bit, and there's just this last bit in case I had to refer to that again, but I don't. So that's this Maps of Meaning, page 8, Mo Meaning Mondays, number 8. And if you like this sort of thing, please give the video a like and subscribe. Thank you.
Well, there's a guy who's got a little YouTube channel, and I've been sending a lot of people his way, Node in a Network, and he's basically been reading all of the stuff in the footnotes of Maps of Meaning,
where we're all sort of plugged in as like nodes on the network.
Node in a network, there's a good username.
A node in a network.
The wrong model, because you're at the center of a network. You're a node in a network.